Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti a questa sessione di festival dedicata a questa presentazione di Doubleclick. Mi presento velocemente anche perché sono una sorta di presentatore di questa sessione. Io sono Luca Bistrattino e sono Rich Media Sales Specialist presso il team di Doubleclick Italia. Per questo motivo mi è stato chiesto di introdurre la persona che effettivamente poi porterà avanti questo speech, e la prima cosa che ho pensato di fare nel momento in cui mi è stata proposta questa opportunità è stata di andare un po' a sbirciare l'account LinkedIn di questo collega, e devo dire che quello che ho visto e quello che ho percepito mi ha colpito moltissimo, ancor prima che poi potessi effettivamente andare a leggere i dettagli del contenuto della sessione di oggi. Infatti il nostro speaker odierno è canadese, ha conseguito una laurea e un master in neuroscienza and behavioral economics presso l'Università della British Columbia. Dopo questa esperienza di studio, diciamo così, si è dedicato per un certo periodo all'insegnamento, ha insegnato niente poco di meno che al Massachusetts Institute of Technology di Boston, dove addirittura teneva un corso di neuromarketing, che è una materia che io personalmente non conoscevo fino a che non l'ho letta nel suo CV. E dopo questa esperienza è approdato in Google, in particolare nel team di Google Life Science, che si occupa fondamentalmente delle applicazioni della tecnologia in ambito medico e di ricerca. Da un anno a questa parte, o poco più, fa parte del nostro team di Doubleclick a New York e ricopre il ruolo di Product Manager per quanto riguarda le Creative Solution. Chiaramente appena ho letto questo notevole curriculum mi sono subito reso conto che avrebbe potuto dare un punto di vista e una visione unica rispetto a quanto siamo abituati a vedere nel mercato, nel senso siamo più abituati a vedere profili economici, di comunicazione, ingegneristici casomai. Invece questo approccio medico sicuramente offre l'opportunità di andare a capire effettivamente come il messaggio che noi deliveriamo tramite una creatività, tramite una frase, tramite uno slogan, effettivamente interagisce con quello che è la chimica del nostro cervello, del cervello di chiunque, e quindi come questa conoscenza possa effettivamente aiutarci a deliberare dei messaggi migliori ed essere più efficaci, essere più d'impatto. Non voglio togliere troppo tempo al contenuto di questo speech, quindi chiamo sul palco e invito Mr. Derek Dunfield. Come here. Un applauso, signore. Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, it's fantastic to be here. They need my password to start the presentation. Thank you, Google. 1 second. That's funny. Awesome. Yeah. Full success. All right. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been on a whirlwind tour of EMEA for the past week and a half, visiting a whole bunch of our sales offices from London to Amsterdam, Paris, and this is my last stop. And I couldn't be luckier to have come to Milan to be able to see it and hopefully take a little bit of time off to check out the city. So today I'm going to do a presentation that's pretty different from what you would normally see a Google PM doing. I'm going to talk a bit about my past life as a researcher and a behavioral economist. But the first thing I'll do is start off with where I am today, just so you can have an idea what I do at DoubleClick. So I'm part of the Creative Solutions team, and I'm a PM there, which means that I help take the business ideas that I hear from our sales folks and translate them into product requirements, so I can work directly with the engineers to build the products that we make in DoubleClick. And it's a lot of fun. It's sort of that like middleman position where you get to talk to everybody and make good ideas, hopefully, if you're lucky. And I have a really fantastic team. We're all based in New York right now, except for one guy in London. It's a really special team, I think, in Google, because we get to concentrate on creative, which isn't something that's been heavily thought about in advertising from a platform solutions standpoint for a while. It's really been media-centric, I would say. So why are we investing in creative? Why do we have a team at Google called Creative Solutions that's building creative products? The answer is actually pretty straightforward. Right now, advertisers tend to direct almost all their spend towards media. 90% of the spend is going towards media and only about 10% to creative development. And this is just the world that we live in today. The problem with that, maybe, is that creative is the most effective thing to impact a campaign. So this is the big number we like to throw up on the screen. 70% of the impact comes from creative. That's the messaging and the design and what people are actually seeing. And yet for some reason it's sort of this forgotten art a lot of the time in today's media-centric strategy. So we're trying to bring it back. And that's what the creative solutions team is doing, and hopefully you'll see some cool products coming out from Google that focus a little bit more on that in the near future. So we always think about programmatic being the opportunity to reach the right person in the right moment. And I think the real message for everybody about creative today is that it's the right person at the right moment with the right message. And I think some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, more researchy stuff in the next few minutes, should sell you on this idea, but we'll see. So the DNA of a product manager. The next thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about myself and how I got here. When I was going around to all the sales team, that was always like the starting point because people were very confused why I decided to join advertising. This is sort of the progression of my life. This is an XKCD cartoon that goes from like the most purest of scientists, the mathematician, to the quote-unquote least purist, the sociologist. So I've been doing that exact walk. I started as a physicist in my undergrad and my master's, and then for my PhD, I was working in hard neuroscience. So we were actually looking at developing brains under a microscope, for 15 hours a day in a dark room, watching the neurons literally grow and wire together in real time. So it was a really cool experience. We learned a lot about how the brain works. But what I was missing was the impact on how I could take that science and then hopefully actually, affect something with it. So the next step for me was actually to move closer to psychology. And after I was done my PhD, I joined MIT to do behavioral economics, which, if you don't know the term, it's sort of a mismatch of psychology and math. That's the stepping point. And I was hoping that by doing that, I could be a little bit more applied in my approach of science to real things. So what's behavioral economics? Maybe we'll rest here for a second and talk about it. So economic theory is something that we've used to predict behavior of people for the last 100 years. And the models are pretty solid, but they suggest some really crazy things. They suggest that people have full information of everything in the world when they're making a decision, that they can weigh every single piece of information perfectly because we're, perfect, and that then their choices, once they've made them with this set of perfect information, never change. And clearly that's crazy. And actually marketers have known this for a really long time and have been working on techniques to persuade people to change their opinion and buy new things. And economists get confused with this. They actually say things like advertisement is destroying the world because you're literally pushing people to not follow economic models. You're hurting the economy. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So behavioral economics started to throw in psychology into the mix to better understand why people weren't behaving like economists thought they were. And the answer tends to be the fact that we use heuristics, so rules of thumb, to make a lot of our decisions. And almost 80% of our decisions are subconscious, which means they happen without us even thinking about it, without us even knowing about it. So the first thing I'll tackle here to just convince you that this is a legitimate field is this statement of information is not enough. So economists believe information is enough to make decisions. If you give the information, people will make the right choice. There was this great policy push in New York a few years ago. And behavioral economics tends to affect policy as much as it affects marketing. And the push was, we really, really want people to stop eating so much because people are getting fat and that's costing our healthcare system a lot. So the policy folks came up with the idea that if we put calorie information on fast food restaurant banners, that people would see that some foods were really high in calorie and they wouldn't eat them. So they went through and they pushed this through, and in New York now that's exactly what you see. But one of my colleagues and a good friend of mine, George Lowenstein, decided to do a study on this. So this is a behavioral economist, one of the fathers of behavioral economics from Carnegie Mellon. And he wanted to see if giving this information affected people's behavior like we thought it would. So it turns out, after you do a controlled experiment where you show some people, they go in and they order food without the calorie information, and some people go in and have the calorie information, that the calorie information does nothing. People don't change their behavior. And in fact, there's a slight suggestion that having the calories might have had people even eat more. So it's the exact opposite of the policy that people wanted. And this kind of irrationality, which there's probably some good reason behind it that people are now diving into, is the exact kind of thing that behavioral economics loves to find and then tackle. So another thing that I said was that 80% of the way we make decisions is subconscious, and that might seem controversial too, because we all feel very in control of our decisions. But I always like this example because it's a really clear one that most of us have felt before of driving. So I'm sure that you've had the experience where you get behind the car of the wheel of a car, go home, and then you don't even really remember the trip. Well, that's because your reptile brain is doing the driving for you. It's not like we're determining the exact angle of our hands every time we turn the wheel, or the pressure that we need to put on the gas pedal to be going the exact speed that we want. We just do it inherently and automatically. And a very famous behavioral economist, Daniel Kahneman, has been pushing this idea of thinking fast, thinking slow. And there's a great book, if you want to check it out, has a whole bunch of examples. But the main idea is that most of our processes are set up to be fast and automatic, thinking fast, so we can sort of optimize the way our brain works. Once you drive a few times, it just becomes second nature and you're good to go. And that happens with most of the things that we do in day-to-day life. So those are sort of the baselines of behavioral economics. Now let me convince you even further that this is a real thing. So the way that the brain is set up with this system 1, system 2, is system 1 does a lot of the things that we do, like it helps us drive and it makes decisions. But system 2 is our rational executive function. And we do use that. We do that for math sometimes and like other major decision making. But it also thinks it's in control of everything. So often it will try and report on why you're doing things without really having good information. So this is a real marketer's issue because we all know, marketers know, humans aren't just bad at telling us why they want to do things. We know they're bad, but they're not just bad. They also aren't wired to do it. And a great example of this was from a colleague down the hall at MIT, Josh Ackerman. He set up an experiment where he went out into the street and had people rate on a clipboard someone's job application. So is this person qualified for the job? And the manipulation, so he gave this 100 people, the manipulation was that one clipboard was light and the other clipboard was heavy wood. And it turns out that the people who rated the job applicant on the heavy wood board all thought that they were better qualified and more effective for the job. So just the heaviness, the weight, which we sort of associate with impressiveness, changed people's opinion. And then when you ask them why they had that opinion, they gave us crazy answers like, oh, well, this person was extremely qualified for this reason and this reason, which they just made up. It was their system 2 trying to make up the reasons why they were making choices. A similar experiment, they had people sit in chairs and judge a regular conversation between a boss and an employee to try and understand, if the employee was competent in that case. And people in soft chairs thought the employee was incompetent, and people in hard chairs thought that they were really good. So it's sort of crazy, right? And you can imagine the policy implications, which is most of the behavioral economics time that we spend on. Like, imagine a jury now that's been given hard chairs and is judging someone in a court of law, or the same jury given soft chairs, and how that's going to change their opinion on whether that person is guilty or not guilty. It's crazy stuff. So this is what behavioral economics, behavioral economists tend to focus on. And the main point I guess I'm trying to get across is it's really, really hard to understand what people are thinking. So when I came into the field, we decided to start using, this is we, the field, a few years ago, it's very new, measurements that weren't just self-report psychology reports to be able to understand why people were making the decisions they were. And because I was a neuroscientist, the first thing that I was trying was an MRI, which we use to look at brains. So this is actually an MRI picture taking slices through a cob of corn. And I just wanted to show what it looks like, because it's actually a completely non-invasive thing. We use magnets to ping the water molecules in whatever we're looking at, and you can get a picture, and it sort of goes in slices. So we do that for the brain too, and we can ideally see activity in the brain in real time. And it's actually where the blood in the brain is, which tends to correlate with where activity is, but it's a pretty good measure. And then we could ask cool questions. So the brain has been studied for a long time with MRIs, and this behavioral science part of it is sort of new, but they've located a lot of areas in the brain that we understand more or less what they do. So on the left-hand side here, you can see two little dark circles. That's the reward system in the brain. You might have heard of dopamine. That's where all that stuff happens. And we know that when it lights up, that people are feeling some kind of reward. And this other one, the insular cortex, is actually where people, it lights up when people anticipate pain or disgust or, really bad feelings. So we said, okay, well, we know these two areas exist. Maybe we can do an experiment on decision-making, specifically purchase decision-making, to see if we can predict what people will buy. So the way it worked was people would lie in the MRI, and we'd show them a product, like this puzzle cube, and then they could buy it with real money, and if they actually got it, they would get it at the end of the experiment, so real choices. And the first thing we found out was that when you showed them a product, their reward center lit up. So, rewards, clearly people are thinking, oh, this could be good. And when you showed them the price, that insula part lit up. So this like, oh, price. And actually, the thing I was studying most at MIT was this idea that we call pain of payment, where people actually feel pain when they have to pay for things. It's very irrational, but it's totally real. So the cool part about this wasn't that we could see areas of the brain lighting up when people were making choices. It was that these measures would predict whether a person was going to buy something better than their own self-report. So an example of something where we can use a non-psychology measure to actually learn something about why people are making decisions, reward for product, pain of price, and then be able to predict what they're going to do. Now, clearly you can't carry an MRI around and look into everyone's head. That would be impossible and a little crazy. But it helps us form some ideas on how things might work, on how the brain might work, and how subconscious behavior might work. This is a video that I want to show you next to sort of dive into some things. So there's going to be instructions. I'll read them. There's no sound. Yeah, if you guys want to click. There's no internet connection, so you might not get to see this. If this doesn't work, guys, it's fine. We can always skip it. But, it looks like it might. let's see. I'll go to the screen again. Okay, let's try it. No videos. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what happened in this video because it's pretty cool. So see the team in, stop it. See the team in, oh wait, no, we're on. Okay, good, I didn't give it away.
This is a test of selective attention.
Oh, it even talks, but it's a selective attention test. So here's the deal.
How many times the players wearing white pass the basketball?
Count the number of passes from the white people. Now pay attention because there's going to be a quiz. Okay, try not to count out loud.
How many passes did you count?
How many passes? So there is 15.
Correct answer is 15 passes.
And here's the next question. Now,
But
some
did
of
you see the gorilla?
So honestly, who didn't see the gorilla? Yeah, good, up at the front. When the first time that I watched this, it was in a classroom, and they played this gorilla part afterwards, and I thought they were
This video
screwing
is
with
from
me.
research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted.
So it's completely real,
It is
and
available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs.
and
from
evidently you can go
Stizcon
find out
Productions.
more about it. That was not
Learn
me who
more
was
at
advertising, but
theinvisible-gorilla.com.
this is good. It's fine. It's academic advertisement. That's called selective attention, and usually there's a good part of the audience. So we got maybe got like 5% of the audience, but it can be up to 40% who literally don't see the gorilla. And when I saw it the first time, I didn't see the gorilla. I thought the professor was messing with us, and I even put up my hand in class and I said, "This is ridiculous. You can't trick us that there's some gorilla in the thing." And of course, he replayed the entire video, and there's the gorilla standing in the middle of the screen. So selective attention is real, and it just means that when we're focused on something, really focused, we don't see anything else. And in the world of ads, that actually has a really profound effect. And I'm not sure if you've seen this statistic before. So 86% of people suffer from banner blindness. So ad blindness. They don't see banners when they're surfing the web. And it's been shown not just with self-report like psychology, but also some of these quote-unquote neuromarketing measures like eye tracking. So that's the example on the left-hand side where they tracked eyes on the screen, and you can see the big banner on the bottom, and no one was looking at it. So banner blindness is real, and it's a form of selective attention. Now there's some asides to this, which your peripheral vision still sees it, and it may influence your decision-making anyway, and I'm not going to dive into that, but it's a really interesting topic. Today I just want to focus on, if we know this, if we know that selective attention is something that's real, we should probably deal with it. And that's exactly, in part, why native advertising is now taking off. So these are just two examples of native ads where you can see the ad is directly in the stream, and it looks relatively similar to the actual things that you were trying to read, the content that you were trying to read. So ideally, the brain doesn't skip past these when you're looking at it. Even interstitials, like I challenge anyone in the room, when you have a pop-up in mobile, do you really see that, or do you just see the X in the upper right-hand side when you click it? It's something to think about. So native might be the answer for this, and there's been some neuromarketing research on that to show that people actually do look at native ads. So when they're directly in the stream, your eyes catch it. And the end result of that is that the ads are viewed about 2 times as much as banner ads. Pretty cool. Now the actual influence on brand lift and click-through rate and all that stuff, not in this study, so I'm not actually sure. Maybe somebody can tell me afterwards. But it's a pretty promising thing to say, hey, let's use our understanding of how people really work, how they really think, and design ads and creatives to mesh with that. The corollary here, and I don't have data on it, but it's a well-known fact in psychology, is that if you try and trick someone, you're going to have a lot of backlash. So another side of native is don't make it look so much like the content that people don't realize it's not an ad. That will actually be a very bad idea. But in general, it looks like people aren't doing that, so here's some more data. About 70% of folks seem to think that native is okay. There's been no complaints. So it might be a really good advertising platform. Next step. Okay, so this is a bit of an aside, but for the next 3 slides, we get to have some fun. So this is a talk about a campaign that happened way back in 2007, and you've probably seen this ad before, but I think it's worth watching again. Cadbury came to Fallon, London, with a really clear and concise brief about the ad campaign that they wanted. They wanted to get the love back to their chocolates. And Fallon came up with a few ideas, but their creative brief that came out of the campaign brief was the communication should feel as good as eating the product itself. And this is the ad that they came up with. And if you guys want to click, we'll enjoy it for a minute. Ignore the other ads. So there are 1,000 reasons why that ad is awesome. And every time I see it, I get a little tear in my eye. Yeah, so that's called the sympathetic nervous system that's setting up your limbic system to cry when you hear music that has a certain tonality like that. I don't know if they knew that Phil Collins did that to people, but it was a good choice. The reason why I wanted to show you that wasn't because it was a brilliant creative. It was because when they did pre-testing of this ad, it completely, utterly failed. So when you looked at things like brand linkage, failed. Persuasion, failed. And these are the things that we tend to measure our ads by. How effective is it going to be when we put it out there? So there was another neuroeconomic paper, but in this case, the main measurements were psychological, where they took a look at all of the ads, and I think it was I don't remember which year it was, but in a 1-year period that had won creative awards, or like were in the top to win creative awards but didn't win. And they measured a new measurement, sort of a pre-testing measure for ads, which was how it made people feel. And it was a mixture of a whole bunch of different feelings that you could check off in this box, and then they made a combined metric. But the main feelings were like happiness, anger, sadness, and the full round of emotions. And the way they coded this specific measurement was saying that happiness was a plus, gave you a good number, and everything else was a negative, even neutral. Neutral was a negative. So they were really looking for happy emotions. And you can see here on the left-hand side that the effects were really, really interesting. This Cadbury monkey one, clearly success. according to the emotional measure. And some of these other IPA awards, like they're all stacked at the top 50%. So emotion was extremely predictive of at least ad rewards. And it was also clearly predictive of a great commercial about a gorilla. What's even more interesting, though, are these little black bars, which are pre-testing measures of key message. So these are all different ads. This isn't just the gorilla ad. And they also mapped whether or not, or where the key message landed on this scale. And you can see that from most successful to least successful, or most emotional to least emotional in this case, there's no correlation whatsoever. So interestingly, the things that we thought as homo economists, the right things, the front brain rational choices that people should be making in theory to determine whether an ad is good, like key message, or whether it seems like it works with my brand, or whether it's persuasive, don't seem to be nearly as effective as an even simpler method, but this just doesn't make people happy. So something to think about. The other really neat part of this study is that they used a different neuroeconomic method called skin conductance. And here's a graphic for that. Turns out that when you have emotional responses, you sweat a little bit. And if you put an electrode on your finger, you can measure that. In most cases, they also measure heart rate and respiratory rate, and then maybe even have a little accelerometer on their chest to see how fast they're breathing. And you put all that together and you get a really interesting measure without having to use a MRI to understand how people are feeling and not how they report their feeling. So that's actually where most neuromarketing companies go these days. It's because it's quite cheap to set up. And I guess maybe the other term that you'd hear for all of that stuff that I just said is a lie detector test. It's the exact same stuff that they used to use in the 60s and what they use in movies today. It's a little less used in real life today, but it's still there. So in the ad testing study, they saw that people had higher responses as well. So, okay, now that we have this tech, where can we use it for something that's really interesting? And I think the most interesting study that I know about is with a PVR. So there was a huge worry when these new video recording devices came out, that people would fast forward through all their ads and no one would ever look at them or care about them, and brands would suffer and the world would start on fire. And from a rational standpoint, that actually makes a lot of sense. I would have been worried too. But when we dive into the actual neuroeconomics and the real measurements behind it, it turns out it's not the case. So here's a really interesting statistic. They did this study where they had people, one part of the group, look at full ads, regular everyday ads, that they, while they were watching television. And the other group was able to have a PVR where they could record their shows and then fast forward through the ads. And it was completely manually chosen. So just like at home, we don't always fast forward because sometimes we forget and we're making food in the kitchen, and sometimes we're really interested in the show we're watching, so we're fast forwarding like crazy. So that was the setup. And then they tried to compare the standard metrics that we use, like aided ad recall and brand recognition, to see how the fast-forwarded ads turned out. Did they affect people at all? Now, to be fair, and I think they made a good choice on this, they messed with the metric a little bit. So they said, if someone's fast-forwarding at 6 times speed, we would logically assume that the ad recognition that you would get would be 1/6 of if they were to watch it normally. So they're saying if you compress a commercial to 1/6 of it, we expect it to have 1/6 of the bump. So that's the expected amount. But what they found was that the actual aided ad recall and actual brand recognition was much higher than the expected amount. So 2 times to 3 times, meaning that people are definitely seeing brands, recognizing ads, even when they're being fast forward, and it's at a rate that's much higher than we ever would have expected. This is the coolest part of the study, though. So they also looked at what happens if you've seen an ad before, and then you're watching it again in fast forward mode. And the no prior exposure does have a pretty low, if you've never seen the ad before, you have a pretty low recall on what that ad is if you see the actual ad again. But if you've seen the ad before, the prior exposure or the ad recall from prior exposure goes way up, and also almost matches if you had seen the ad standard in the first place. So this is an amazing statistic. It means if you've seen an ad, a fast-forwarded ad still has a huge effect on you. And I think it argues something that, from a creative side, I'm really excited about, which is storytelling. So if we can take not only a regular ad and then see a fast-forwarded ad and have an effect, imagine what we can do if we have a story that people are following in different ads over time that matches together and that even repeats itself occasionally. Probably one of the most effective ways to influence someone. And I would encourage you all to read a DARPA study. DARPA is like the American defense side, that is actually suggesting that storytelling is one of the most persuasive ways to influence people. And you can check that out on Google. Okay, so one last experiment to talk about today, which is, I think, wraps everything nicely together. It's another neuroscience experiment. And this time it was about wine. So if you've never seen an MRI before, they're pretty big and pretty clunky. But in this experiment, they actually had people drinking wine in the MRI. So the way it would work is that you'd have people lie down on this bench, and then you put the little hood on them, and they would slide into the magnet, and there'd be a hose that would come all the way up, and then they'd put it in their mouth, and we'd give them wine through the little hose. So it was like a weird setup, but it's pretty good. They get to drink wine in the MRI, and while they were doing that, we were looking at the pleasure center of their brain. So the place that we know lights up when people are experiencing pleasantness. So that's like, floral scents or good tasting wine, not the reward center, but in this case, the pleasantness center. And we wanted to see the difference between the response to a cheap wine, a $10 wine, and an expensive wine, a $90 wine, though I'm sure they get much more expensive here in Milan. So that's exactly what we did, and we also asked the people to rate the two wines, their personal opinions. So as you can imagine, the $90 wine blew the $10 wine out of the water. People thought it was at least twice as good, if not better, on a regular 1 to 5 scale. But the trick, of course, was it was the same wine. So we just told them the prices were different. And this work was actually done by Hilke Plasman, who is a colleague again. I didn't get to be part of it, but we were doing a similar experiment later at my time at MIT. So really cool thing that, they're drinking the wine, they're tricked, they think it's so much better. So the rationalist in us would say, well, clearly people just are saying that they like the $90 wine better because, you're supposed to like the $90 wine better, right? At least that's what everybody told me. I was supposed to like it better. But when we looked at the brain activity, it turned out that it also was about twice as high for the $90 wine. This is a crazy thing. It means that not only were people reporting it was better, they were actually feeling it was better. So this is awesome, and it's also something that we predict in behavioral economics. It's called the price-quality heuristic. So right in normal days, we can't access all of the information that we have in life, so we have to use tricks to be able to guess, subconsciously guess what is good and what is bad. And price usually is a fantastic signal for that. Things that are expensive tend to be better, and things that are less expensive tend to be less good. And there's a lot of marketing tricks that utilize this, pretty standard statement. But the brain literally uses that to be able to make decisions. So if you say, look, the $90 wine is $90, it can actually make you feel better and experience the product that you just bought in a more positive way. Crazy, right? So what are the other heuristics that we use to gauge quality? Because price is clearly one, but there's other ones. And the one I'd like to show you to sort of end the talk is creativity. So creativity can also be a metric that people use to decide whether or not something is quality or not. And there was that's awesome. And there was a great study that showed if you increase the creativity of the ads that you have, that you're showing people, that not only do they judge them as more creative, which makes sense, but they also have higher brand lift and higher, no, I don't have the stats. Higher brand lift and another really useful stat that I can't remember. So it affects the things that you care about. And the most important part of that study was that it wasn't the creativity that I talked about in the monkey study where we were doing award-winning ads. The only thing they were varying was the text in the ad. They kept everything else the same and tried to come up with more creative descriptions and headlines. And it literally doubled their brand lift. And the reason why is because people use creativity as a heuristic. If a brand can take a little bit more time to come up with a creative message, clearly they're of higher value than a brand that can't. So it's a simple behavioral and economic rule. And I'll end with, what would the world look like if we thought creative first? And I think we'd have a lot more interesting ads, but we'd also have a lot more effective ads, because in the end, people are constantly being driven by their emotions and by these heuristics that creative can tap into more easily than any media buying plan that you could ever make. So thank you very much. Thanks, guys. That was fun. I'm glad the monkey worked.
Congratulations.
Yeah, cheers.